En la mar hay una torre. En la torre hay una ventana. En la ventana hay una niña que a los marineros llama. Once there was a sultan, so powerful his armies made the world tremble. A sultan so wealthy his treasury was the envy of other kings. But a sultan whose heart was forever heavy, because not once had the simple joy of living knocked on his door. But one day it was announced that a baby girl was born to the sultan's wife. And on that day the sultan's heart raced like that of a schoolboy. He held his newborn daughter in his arms, and he anxiously awaited to hear from the soothsayers who were to predict the future of this new princess. But all the soothsayers shook their heads gravely, saying the same thing. "Your Majesty," they said, "your daughter will have a golden future. Your Majesty," they said, "your daughter will be more beautiful with each year that you love her. But alas, who will protect your daughter from the snake that strikes her the day she comes of age? Who will protect your daughter from the snake that strikes her the day she comes of age?" Now when the Sultan heard this terrible prophecy, darkness came over his eyes. He could not stop thinking of the terrible fate awaiting his beloved newborn daughter. He thought about it all day when he was sitting in the divan in the assembly. He thought about it all night as he tossed and turned in bed. Until one night he had a dream. And in his dream, he saw a stormy sea. And emerging from the depths of that sea, there was a tower that rose higher and higher and higher until it brushed against the clouds. And the moon sent moon rays and covered the walls of the tower so it shone as brightly as 1,000 stars. And when the Sultan woke up from this dream, he cried out, Es con una torre que puedo trocar el goral de mi hija." It is after all with a tower that I could protect my daughter from her terrible fate. And so at once, on a lonely island in the middle of the sea, he had built a tower that brushed against the clouds. And to that tower he brought his daughter, his newborn daughter, and everything she would need to live on that lonely island: teachers and seamstresses and pastry cooks. And there, on that faraway island, there is where the Sultan's daughter grew up. And as each year passed, the Sultan wondered about his daughter. What were the first words she uttered, he wondered to himself. How did she look on this bright spring day when he saw the azure blue sky above him? What were the playthings of his beautiful young daughter, his daughter that he had never seen? And then, after some years, he received something from a messenger. It was a framed portrait, painted by the hand of the princess herself, a framed self-portrait. And when he looked into that portrait, it was so lifelike, He thought his daughter was standing right before him. How beautiful she had become, his daughter, he thought to himself. How proud he was of this beautiful daughter of his own. And then he read, in gold letter at the bottom of the frame, these letters that were put by the princess herself. Para el mejor padre del mundo. For the best father in the world. And when he read those words, his eyes welled with tears. So many years they had been separated, and still she loved him with those sweet words that she inscribed in the bottom of that frame. Para el mejor padre del mundo. For the best father in the world. Well, from that moment forward, he could not part from that portrait. He brought it with him everywhere. He had it placed beside him every day when he was sitting in the divan, in the assembly. He had it placed to him every night beside his bed before he went to sleep. He took one glance at it and smiled, and imagined the portrait smiled back at him before he fell into a deep, sweet sleep. Now it was during this time that the Sultan was engaged in a terrible war with the Shah of Persia. And there was a point in the war where the Shah had the upper hand in this war and launched a fierce offensive against the Sultan's army. So fierce that the Sultan had to run but for his life, leaving everything behind him and his soldiers. And to the abandoned camp of the Sultan, there came the Shah's own son, the Prince of Persia, scouting around for what loot, what spoils he could bring back to his father. He saw the golden tent, and he knew that was the tent that the Sultan had abandoned before his flight. And he went into that golden tent, and the first thing that caught his eye was that portrait. And when he looked in that portrait, he thought to himself he had never seen anyone more beautiful than she. Who could she be, he thought to himself. Where could he find her? And then he read the golden letters inscribed in the bottom of the frame. Para el mejor padre del mundo. For the best father in the world. And at once the Prince of Persia understood that this beauty was none other than the daughter of the Sultan, his father's most bitter enemy. And so at once he went to his father, pleading with him, Peder, father, you must stop this terrible war. You must stop this terrible war. What do you say? Protested the Shah. You asked me to stop this war. Now I have the upper hand over that bitter Sultan who has been causing me trouble since my first breath. One more offensive and I will crush this bitter enemy once and for all. The prince turned to his father and he said, Peder, father, please retreat your armies. I will go to Istanbul. I will go to the great city of the Sultan, and when I come back, I will explain to you everything. But please, cease your offensive. The Shah of Persia, who loved his son more than anything in the world, could not even refuse him this. And so the Prince of Persia, in disguise, went to the great city of the Sultan, the great city of Istanbul, and he had that portrait under his arm. And when he went through the gates of the great city, he walked to anyone who was crossing his path, anyone he met, and he pleaded with them, asking them, Do you know where I could find this beauty? Do you know where I could find her? And when he turned to some people, their only answer was, "No sé, bil miorim, I don't know." And then he walked down the street and he saw a gathering of other people, and he went to them and he pleaded with them, "Do you know where I could find her? Do you know where I could find this beauty who has set my heart on fire?" But those people gave the same answer. "No sé, bil miorim, I don't know." And everywhere he turned and he asked the same question, he always got the same shake of heads and the same answer, "No sé, bil miorim, I don't know." And the prince became dejected. No one was going to help him. And so he sat on a bench that faced a busy street, his head looking down, losing all hope that he would find that beauty who had set his heart on fire. But as he was looking down at the corner of his eye, he saw a huge bundle of branches that seemed to be moving by itself, slowly past him. Wondered how this could be. But as he came closer to that large bundle of branches, he saw these two little feet beneath it that were moving it. And then he came even a little closer, and he noticed underneath that large bundle of branches, there was an old woman crouched down, carrying this heavy burden on her back. And at that moment, the prince forgot his own troubles and was filled with such compassion for this old lady and her heavy burden she was carrying alone on her back. And so he approached her, saying, "Hanum, dear lady, this burden is too heavy for you. Let me carry it for you, and I will bring it right to your door." And at once he threw that heavy bundle of branches on his own back. And the old woman led him to her doorstep. And as he gently rested that burden at her doorstep, the old woman turned to the prince, saying this, "Mansevo, how many people had seen me carry this burden too heavy for my weary shoulders. It was only you who noticed me, only you and no other. I am so filled with gratitude that I will grant you anything you ask of me." The prince turned to the old woman and he said to her, "Abuela, Granny, there is only one thing I want. I want someone to tell me where I could find the beauty who has set my heart on fire." And he showed the woman that portrait. And when she looked at it, at once she recognized who it was. "Mansevo," she said to him, "come follow me, and I will show you where she can be found." And so they walked down the winding streets of the city, out the city gates, until they reached the shore of the sea. The old woman pointed to a tower that emerged from a lonely island in the middle of the sea. "Mansevo," she said to him, "there is where you can find her. But why are you seeking such an impossible thing? Why are you seeking water from the moon? Turn back and do not seek such an impossible thing." But the prince turned to the old woman and he said to her, "Abuela, Granny, I must find her, or if not, I know I will die in my heart. Thank you for showing me where she is, and I will go and find her." "But Mansevo," pleaded the old woman, The Sultan has forbidden anyone to go to this island. Anyone who dares do so will pay for it with their own life." But to this the prince answered the old woman, "Hanum, my dear lady, if I do not find her, I will not have a life worth living." And without a further word, the prince parted from the old woman. He found himself a rowboat, and the next morning he rowed out into the sea. He rowed out just until he was on the shore of that lonely island in the middle of the sea. And he positioned his boat right underneath a balcony that was high above the tower, waiting for the chance moment where that beauty, the one who set his heart on fire, may perchance walk onto the balcony, and he may glance upon her. And in his boat underneath the balcony, he sang this song. "Todo no es suerte, mi buena amiga, mi buena amiga. Ya vi torres altas que un día brillaron juntito al sol, que brillaron juntito al sol." He sang this song again and again, but she did not appear. And so the next day, he rowed to the same spot, positioned himself underneath that balcony, and sang the same song again and again. And this went on for days and days, until one day finally, she appeared on the balcony. For all this time, the princess was wondering where that sweet, honey-like voice was coming from. And she looked down, and she saw the handsome young prince in his boat. And she cried out to him, "Hermoso, Hermoso, why do you come here every day singing to me the same song? Why do you do this?" And down below the prince replied, "Lustra, I come here every day. I come here every day after all, for I am waiting for the day when you come down from that tower and join me in my boat, so that we can return to the world together." "Hermoso, Hermoso," cried out the princess, "don't you understand? Don't you understand that it is my fate to remain forever in this tower in the middle of the sea? Don't you understand that it is my fate to always remain alone, forever alone?" To these words the prince replied, "Lustra, if that is indeed your fate, so it is my fate to wait for you each day until that moment when you come down from that tower and you join me in my boat, so that we can return to the world together." And then day after that, the prince returned. And there was the princess on the balcony waiting to greet him. And each day they spoke a little more, until the princess felt a little more at ease. And she descended from the tower onto the island and welcomed the prince into the tower. And some days after that, they spent many sweet and happy days together. In that tower, on that lonely island, in the middle of the sea. And then the time came. The time came when the princess had finally come of age. And on that day, the Sultan's heart was bursting with joy. "I have protected my beloved daughter from her fate. Now her fate can no longer touch her. Now I could visit her. Now I could feel her embrace, her arms wrapped around mine, And so at once he ordered a royal golden barge to bring the Sultan and his wife and everything and everyone that was needed for a great celebration on that lonely island, a great celebration for the coming of age of his beloved daughter. And into that boat, he brought all the provisions and everything he needed, musicians and dancers and pastry cooks. But on that day, the prince had arrived on the island before the royal barge. The prince too knew that this was the day that his beloved had come of age. And to celebrate, he had brought with him a cluster of fresh roses. He ran up the winding staircase up to the apartment of the princess at the top. He flung open the door, and filled with love and celebration, he placed all those fresh red roses at her feet. But as he did so, there was a snake that slithered from the roses. It made its way to the princess, and it bit her. And to his horror, the prince saw the snake's venom draw away the life from the princess. He found a stone beside him, and he struck that snake dead. And he ran to the side of the princess, and he pressed her body against his, and as he did so, he felt life seeping away, and he began to weep. If this is your terrible fate, if this is your terrible fate, so it is my fate to join you. It is my fate to join you in this terrible death. And so at once he tried to suck the blood from that wound so the snake's venom could kill him as well. But as he did so, the snake's venom was so bitter in his mouth he had to spit it out. So he tried again. And then at that moment, in walked the Sultan and his wife. And what did the Sultan see there? A sight he had dreaded more than anything else. The lifeless body of his daughter. And standing beside it was a strange young man, a stranger, with lips smeared with blood. The sorrow of the Sultan was so deep. He could not cry. He could not scream. His sorrow was so deep. He thought his heart had died at that moment. With no emotion, he turned to the guards, and he ordered them to arrest this intruder, throw chains over him, drag him to the gallows, where a horrible death would await him. The prince, who saw the lifeless body of the only person he had ever loved, had lost hope. He did not resist. There was nothing left to live for. And so he yielded to the guards as they dragged him out of the room. And one by one, they all left the room. The Sultan was the last to leave. But as he took his last steps out, he heard a faint cry. Baba, Baba, Baba. The Sultan turned around to see what it was. And what did he see? That body that was lifeless a moment ago was very slowly coming back to life. Her limbs began to move. Slowly, her eyes began to open. Baba, Daddy, she cried out. Where did you take him? Where did you take this man who was standing beside me? Don't you understand, my father? Don't you understand that this man was the only man? the only man who shared with me my loneliness. This was the only man who shared with me my own illness. This is the man, the only man, that I will ever marry. The Sultan looked at his daughter, and seeing her beautiful face slowly coming back to life, the color coming back to her cheeks, and at that moment he understood something. All his life he was so afraid. He was so afraid of losing his daughter. And at that moment he understood there was only one thing to remove that fear, and it was to set his daughter free. And so of course he would give his blessing to this marriage of his daughter to this young man, even if he was the prince of Persia, even if he was the son of his most bitter enemy. And so they returned to the kingdom, and there were preparations for the most grandiose, the most splendid wedding celebrations. And so, Kirkegun ve Kirkegede, for 40 days and 40 nights there were wedding celebrations throughout the kingdom. And after that, the princess joined her husband in his kingdom, in Persia. And in her new life there, she became the mother of many daughters and many sons of royal lineage. And from that time forward, never again was she ever afraid for her own fate. For from that time forward, never again was she ever a stranger to the simple joy of living. Y ellos tengan bien, y nosotros también. And so they lived happily, and may it be the same for us.